So in this video I'm going to be talking Frampton versus Scott Quigg, and I'm not going to be giving you a final pre-fight prediction in this video. Essentially, I'm not going to just try and keep it until the point of the fight. It's more just that I haven't really finalised my opinion on it, so I kind of wanted to talk a bit about some of the factors that I'm considering and really sort of explain some of the reasons why I'm finding this a tough fight to call. And I guess it's a credit to the fight that it is a tough fight to call, because to be honest, it's quite rare when you see a matchup and it's hard to come down on one side of the fence. You know, usually in boxing, even 50-50 fights are not fights that are actually 50-50. You know, it's very rare to go to the bookmakers and see a professional fight where you can get evens on either side of the play, you know, and that really indicates that that is a 50-50 fight. Now, you know, I'm not saying Frampton versus Scott Quigg is necessarily going to be 50-50 in that sense. I haven't looked at the odds, but I do anticipate Frampton will be a favourite. But in my mind, I'm really struggling to make a pick here, and I'll talk you through the reasons why. Let me say, up till about 6 months ago, in the build-up to this fight, I've always been convinced that Frampton would win the fight. Frampton I have viewed as an extremely classy boxer, a power puncher, and someone who really has a complete set of skills: movement, power, the ability to box, the ability to, you know, play technically from distance, the ability to fight on the inside, defensive skills. You know, Frampton I've viewed as a guy potentially on the way right to the top. Scott Quigg, historically, I've been less convinced about. Yeah, quality of opposition was slightly lower. Performances were slightly less visually eye-catching. You know, we had the Salinas fight where he dropped a draw, and numerous other fights. I remember watching him on a pay-per-view undercard. It may have even been the Cleverly Bellew pay-per-view undercard, where he kind of laboured and, to be honest, bored his way to a 12-round decision win. And I've always felt that while Scott Quigg is a decent fighter and a really solid fighter, he didn't have that X-factor to his game. He didn't have that different level that Frampton had. You know, and sometimes you look at fighters like Martin Murray, Paul Smith, I don't know, Derry Matthews, and you can kind of see that they've got the tools to be very, very strong British champions. They've got the tools to be, you know, real good European level fighters. But do they have that tool to start beating the top fighters in the world in their division? And you kind of, the way I was viewing it is that Scott Quigg would possibly struggle to bridge that gap, whereas Frampton would take that gap in his stride, in my opinion. So this is my historic opinion. You know, I kind of thought historically that Frampton would just be totally outclassing Scott Quigg. However, one thing I often talk about in my videos is I think momentum in boxing is absolutely everything. And I think Scott Quigg currently has much more momentum behind him than Frampton. You know, we saw Frampton go and make his debut in the States, having signed with Al Heyman. And I must admit, I, like most, weren't impressed. He was dropped in the fight against a Mexican opponent who was very, very lowly rated in terms of world rankings, and, you know, certainly in terms of BoxRec and that side of things. And for me, it wasn't just that he was dropped in the fight, it's that he appeared to get hurt in the fight, and he struggled. He didn't look as offensively capable. There were defensive gaps left, right and centre. And even later in the fight when he was doing well, I still saw punches landing that were really wobbling Frampton. You know, you could argue that maybe that opponent was underrated because he wasn't used to having full training camps to prepare, and Frampton gave him a full training camp. You could also argue that Frampton was undermotivated given the lower level of opposition. But to be honest, you have to look at the fight as it is and not be impressed. And, you know, based on that performance alone, Frampton won't beat Scott Quigg. He'll have to raise his game substantially. And of course, we anticipate that he will raise his game substantially. But all I'm getting at is Frampton is coming off arguably a career worst performance, which is completely the opposite of Scott Quigg, who went out and destroyed Kiko Martinez in 2 rounds in what was definitely the biggest and most high-profile fight of his career. You know, a lot of people on my channel in the comment section were picking on Kiko Martinez to win the fight, betting on Kiko Martinez to win the fight, and sort of suggesting this was going to expose what a hype job Scott Quigg actually was. You know, luckily, for a rare occasion, I got that one right, and I picked Scott Quigg. And you couldn't fail to be impressed. You know, Kiko Martinez had a good first round, but Quigg kept calm, picked his shots, and finished with a ruthlessness that showed Quigg himself had punching power. You know, I've never historically viewed Quigg as a big puncher. I've seen him go the distance in several fights. I've always thought he was a painful body puncher, but Quigg showed in this fight that he's got a lot of punching power, and that power transcended up to the biggest name of his career so far in Kiko Martinez. So the momentum really appeared to shift. You know, Kiko Martinez is a guy who'd gone late in 2 fights with Carl Frampton. I think he went the distance in one of the 2 fights with Carl Frampton, whereas Scott Quigg was able to extinguish him in a few rounds. You know, at the same time, Carl Frampton putting in a career worst performance. And I started to change my mind. So historically, as I say, I've always been someone who strongly considered Carl Frampton would win this fight. Up to about 3-4 months ago, I had actually changed my opinion completely and was picking Scott Quigg. My feeling is that Scott Quigg is very big and very, very strong at the weight. And I know Carl Frampton has some aspects of his record that make it look like he's a power puncher. And he may well be. I haven't finalised a decision on that. But I'm not sure Carl Frampton's going to be able to hurt and stop Scott Quigg. I just view Scott Quigg as very strong and very tough and very powerful at that weight. And even though Frampton may be able to outbox him, is he going to hurt him? I don't know. And I was kind of thinking the way Scott Quigg can possibly benefit is by, if this fight turns into a bit of a tear-up, which it may do given the hype and given the dislike and given the fact that it's the biggest fight in both of their careers and they're each other's big rivals. And if it does develop into a tear-up, you know, Scott Quigg, for me, is the bigger man, the stronger man, the tougher man. And that could play right into Scott Quigg's hands, you know. So, especially with Frampton being hurt and wobbled several times in his last fight against a much lesser opponent than Scott Quigg. So for me, the momentum started to change, and with that momentum changed my opinion. And I always went from thinking this would be a relatively routine victory for Carl Frampton to thinking that, you know, Scott Quigg was probably going to have enough to take this fight. Now, you know, we're still 3 weeks away probably, and I really can't make my mind up. You know, again, I'm probably for the only time in the build-up to this fight where I don't have a strong opinion on either side of the coin. You know, I am really, really struggling to pick here, and I think it could go either way. I think if it does develop into a tear-up, it's going to be in Scott Quigg's game. I think if it fights long and tactically and technically and comes down to a boxing match, then it's going to be in Carl Frampton's game. And I really need to have a look at both guys again and kind of work out how I think this is going to play out round by round, because I think this fight could end in very, very different ways depending on the tactics that are employed by both men. You know, Scott Quigg, I see him as not on the same level in terms of Carl Frampton for boxing capabilities, you know. However, does he need to be on that same level if this fight plays out the way that I'm possibly expecting it to play out, where the two guys settle their differences in the middle of the ring? You know, I don't know. It's a real tough one for me, and one that I'm very much struggling with. The one bit that concerned me from a Scott Quigg perspective is at the press conference in the press tour, Joe Gallagher was regularly saying to Team Frampton, "Oh, don't run all night, Carl. You know, come and have a fight. Don't run. And for me, that was the wrong thing to say from a trainer. That was almost admitting that you can't beat Carl Frampton if he runs. And let me say, runs translates to boxes. You know, if Carl Frampton is able to keep his discipline, and it's going to be hard because there's going to be the crowd baying for blood, you know, the big lights, the watching public on pay-per-view, but if Frampton does a Floyd Mayweather and keeps calm, follows a strict game plan, Carl Frampton does win that fight. And I think Joe Gallagher knows that. And all of this telling an opponent not to run, not to stand and have a fight, I think the McGuigans are going to use that to their advantage, and they're going to be saying to Carl, look, you know, Scott Quigg is relying on you getting into a tear-up and standing in the centre of the ring here. You know, let's not play in Scott Quigg's hands. You know, I look at Shane McGuigan, the trainer, and I look at the game plans he implemented for his first fights with David Haye, with George Groves. And I saw patience in both of their games. You know, those are explosive fighters, but I saw them coming out, having a look at the opponent, taking their time, get the jab going, pick the spots, not rushing in, not getting caught with anything silly. You know, just take the foot off the gas a bit. You're the superior operator in there. Get your jab moving, have a look. Stay safe with your boxing capability. And I think that the McGuigans will be trying to calm Carl down, trying to stop it from developing into a macho square off and use those sort of tactics. So if they do, it's going to be a lot harder for Scott Quigg, you know. But then again, if Scott Quigg can get inside on Carl Frampton, get up close with him, rough him up, start hitting him to the body, then it could so easily swing the other way. Real tough fight to call. I like fights like this. It's very rare that I don't have a strong opinion on either way of a fight, and for me it's an indication that this is a good matchup. Let me know your thoughts. Who are you picking? Do you find this a hard fight to call, or are you very much on one side? I promise I will do a full prediction before the fight. I will get off the fence. I'm just not quite ready to do that just yet. Thanks a lot for watching. If you've enjoyed this, do hit the thumbs up button. Please subscribe to the channel so you can check out all the fight build up I do. Thanks for watching.